Welcome, everybody. My name is Courtney, and I am the tech host for this session. We will now begin with Judith Rain Baruti introducing our session.
Hello, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the presentation of the 2021 Public Diplomacy Association of America Awards for Achievement in Public Diplomacy. I'd like to begin by thanking Courtney Indart, who is the Information Officer at Meridian International and our tech host today. On behalf of the Awards Committee, I'd like to say how very impressed we were by the quantity and the quality of the nominations submitted this year. In spite of COVID, political unrest, drawdowns, and other obstacles of which you are well aware, members of the Foreign Service community, including officers and locally employed staff and others, generated innovative and effective programming, outreach to explain the policies and values of the United States, and, as we used to say, to make friends for America. We look forward to hearing more about your outstanding work. And we want to say how much we appreciate your service in these very difficult times. Now, PDAA Program Chairman Joan Maurer will present our winners for this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you for the work that you put into selecting the 4 winning teams, and they are, as you said, incredibly impressive. We've sent out a lot of background material about who our winners are, so I'm going to introduce them, just highlight their projects, and then turn the mic over to them to explain what they did and how they won the award. Couple of notes, we will go to Q&A, so if you want to ask a question, please go to the Q&A box. We will not be taking questions verbally. We'll be monitoring the box and reading the questions to our winners. So with that, I'm going to start with Sohini Das. Sohini is in Kolkata. She's an engagement specialist, and she had won for her work on an anti-trafficking program. So with that, Sohini, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful and honored to share the story of US Consulate Kolkata's signature initiative, our Anti-Trafficking-in-Person Conclaves. Our consular district comprises of 11 states in East and Northeast India, 300 million people, 5 international borders. This is a source, transit, and destination point for human trafficking. Today's story, however, is not about depressing, alarming statistics, nor is it about how this region continues to be an epicenter during the time of the pandemic. It is a story of how a public diplomacy campaign has successfully built sustainable partnerships, influenced policy, shaped media narratives, and empowered a whole new generation of activists. When we started way back in 2012, we realized very early on the power of convening people, incredible people who are doing work on the ground, but maybe on their own terms. And when we bring these committed, passionate people together, we have real conversations to build solutions. And that is what exactly we did. We understood the problems, we identified the needs and gaps, and used every possible public diplomacy tool, traditional and non-traditional, to connect, to collaborate, and call for action. Our anti-trafficking conclaves have now become launchpads leveraged by governments to make important policy statements. They garner huge attention at the regional level. However, we as the public affairs section in Kolkata believe it is what we continue to do in between our conclaves that wherein lies the success of this incredible campaign. Be it our English language programs to empower survivors, US speaker programs, US exchange programs, or even our anti-trafficking empowerment fairs driven towards educating the consumer about fair trade. We continue to build the foundation for a sustainable, people-led US-India partnership to combat human trafficking. The year 2020 actually started on a very high note for us, kicking off the 9th conclave with a series of high-level interstate collaborative workshops. We have this incredibly successful campaign in our own state of West Bengal, which is police-led school-based prevention campaign. And we took it as a model to share the best practices with 3 other neighboring states, which was reporting very high incidence of trafficking. We also put together an incredibly powerful women's leadership and hockey camp using the State Department's Sports Envoy program, bringing together girls from some of the most heavily trafficked districts of Jharkhand, which incidentally reports the highest number of labor trafficking cases in the country. The presence of former Assistant Secretary Mary Royce, partnership of Middlebury College in Vermont, the Jharkhand Sports Department, the Criminal Investigation Department, the Southeastern Railways brought in huge media attention and very high-level political participation. In fact, at that very event, the then newly elected Jharkhand Chief Minister committed that combating human trafficking would be a policy priority for his government. We also worked very closely with US-based nonprofits, Theatre Alliance and Story Center, using the State Department's Arts Envoy program to create a series of digital stories led by survivors themselves, advocating for their voices at the policy table. In fact, the stories by now have been seen by more than 10,700 judges as well as law enforcement officers, making a direct impact on arrests as well as prosecution. And so when the pandemic struck here, and which was compounded several times worse, of course, by the super cyclone Amphan in eastern India, we did not stop. We continued to be strengthened with our various partners and allies that we had nurtured over the years. So even as the schools closed down, our local partners on ground continued to work with governments on prevention campaigns. bringing together 1,500 police officers, 4,000 educators, 12,000 community workers, and over 500,000 at-risk adolescent youth, boys and girls, who stepped up and joined the prevention campaign to counter the recruitment efforts of traffickers. We are very proud that many of these initiatives today have been adopted by the local governments themselves and are running on their own. Not to forget our other incredible partners, the young leaders across South Asia, 83 leaders who came together at our 8th conclave at the American Center in Kolkata 2 years back during the pandemic time, stepped up efforts with the formation of 22 anti-trafficking clubs across the region, reaching over 2 million people through a range of innovative campaigns, from Instagram to performative storytelling, from radio shows to cartoon series. This, of course, we are very conscious, remains just the tip of the iceberg, because trafficking is a very complex issue and a lot more needs to be done. We remain grateful to every colleague across Mission India and the region, but I have to specially mention Shomi Ghosh and Deepa Datta, my former supervisors, Greg Pardo and Jamie Dragon, our present Consul General, Patty Hoffman, and of course, our Public Affairs Officer, Monica Shai, whose very passionate campaigning and recognizing of this cause has given new energy to our campaign. And we will miss you, Monica. Not to forget our incredible partners, the judiciary, the law enforcement, the academic institutions, the civil society partners, the private sector, and of course, our key implementing partner, Shakti Vahini. You remain the heroes on the ground. And finally, we made friends. That is what Judith mentioned at the beginning. Our special friends. I clearly remember Anita, who held my hand continuously through the 2015 conclave in Ranchi. A survivor who barely uttered a few words, is now a local government representative leading campaigns in her village. Srija, who would have lost herself in Mumbai's red light district, is now a founder member of Kolkata-based nonprofit advocating for the use of creative rehabilitation tools in government shelter homes. Police officer Sanjeev Kumar, who I have myself seen in the role of a cheerleader on the sidelines of the hockey camp. Or Judge Durga Khaitan, who miraculously weaved her way through all of the bureaucracy to bring, for the first time in the 160 years of Calcutta High Court, a US speaker program and a dance theater performance in a bid to sensitize lawyers and judges. These are the real people, and many others like them, who form the lifeblood of our campaign. And finally, going back to my personal story, my Fulbright, followed by 10 years in Santa Fe, New Mexico, followed by 10 years here at the US Consulate in Kolkata, which also coincides with 10 years of the conclave, just tells me every day that human connections form the cornerstone of public diplomacy, always. Thank you.
Sohini, that was an incredibly fascinating tale, and there's so many questions that come out of that. I mean, including my personal favorite, the hockey program. So we applaud you. We applaud your team. It sounds like you had amazing impact, and we'll look forward to reverting to you when the question and answer period comes around. So thank you, Sohini Das in Kolkata. Now we're going to turn to the Hong Kong team led by Jacqueline Deely. Jacqueline and her two colleagues, it's midnight in Hong Kong, and they've been up all night. So showing that people work round the clock for public diplomacy. So Jacqueline, please, over to you. Please introduce your colleagues and tell us about what you did to counter Beijing's influence.
Oh, thank you very much, Joan. So I'm joined here by my two colleagues, Information Officer and Spokesperson Harvey Cernovitz, and our Cultural Affairs Officer Thomas Wei. And we have the great honor to represent a past team of 20, all of whom are rock stars from the US Consulate in Hong Kong. So we are deeply honored to receive this achievement award from the Public Diplomacy Association of America. You know, I must say that the programs for which we're being recognized, the media engagement, the building and leveraging of alumni networks, the promoting of US values, they really seem like the bread and butter of PD programs, only done by posts around the world. But what is different and what has made our engagement infinitely harder, but also more essential, more impactful, more meaningful and rewarding is the rapidly deteriorating operating environment in which we are now working. So to put it bluntly, over the past year, Beijing has undermined Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. It's installed a draconian national security law and greatly constricted freedoms of speech and expression. These actions have caused ripples of chilling uncertainty throughout Hong Kong society, including media and academic circles and cultural spaces, greatly affecting our ability to engage with our natural partners and to reach Hong Kong audiences. So we have pivoted, we've adapted, and despite the constraints, we have scored important wins. And so first to Harvey to describe the media engagement.
Great, thank you, Jacqueline. Hong Kong has a unique messaging environment. On one hand, Beijing owns or controls a significant portion of the local media, while at the same time, there are independent media organizations, a vibrant social media scene, and generally free access to information. Through a variety of platforms, we created and shared a mix of hard policy statements and softer messages promoting our long history of shared values. The United States has been in Hong Kong for more than 175 years. These messages included everything from G7 joint statements to more nuanced op-eds and social media posts highlighting the positive role of the United States in Hong Kong. We also took on Beijing's malign activities to not just counter their propaganda, but also use their frequent overreach to remind Hong Kongers that Beijing's media is an unreliable source of information. In fact, these posts were amongst our most popular, crossing over from our Facebook page to front page headlines in major newspapers and television news reporting. Tom?
Oh, thank you, Harvey. So the CAO class teaches you that Fulbright is our flagship exchange program and that everyone loves it, even when times get really tough. So while for Hong Kong, Fulbright was suspended, of course, at the same time that much of our longstanding cultural programming started coming under intense pressure. So to push back against Beijing's narratives, what we needed were credible, authentic, local voices, and the louder the voices, the better. So we activated our exchange alumni to serve in this capacity and also identified a different strategic network to tap. And that was Hong Kong's US university clubs, alumni clubs. So these clubs represent thousands of US educated professionals. Some are American, but most are local. And they're key opinion leaders that are already interwoven across all of Hong Kong society. So what we did was we coordinated a campaign for our chief of mission to speak to each of these groups, delivering a message that underscored our shared values and activated these alumni to support Hong Kong's fundamental freedoms. As we continue to grow this network and build connections between these groups, our message to these influential members of Hong Kong society is to remember to use their voices loudly to advocate for the very freedoms that have contributed to Hong Kong's success as the global city that they call home.
And on top of what Harvey and Tom have already mentioned, I would like to highlight two unique programs we designed and implemented that have allowed us to advance US interests, maintain key relationships, and reach new audiences. The first is last year's US-Hong Kong Dialogue, which we implemented in cooperation with the World Affairs Council in San Francisco. The dialogue brought together executive and legislative branch officials from the United States and Hong Kong, as well as representatives from US business and civil society for a 2-day retreat in the United States for frank discussions about our bilateral political, economic, and cultural relations. The second program is ongoing, and that's a year-long traveling exhibit we commissioned and co-designed on the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in the United States, which highlights the importance of peaceful protest and civic engagement to effectuate positive change and improve our democracy and our institutions. The exhibit was first displayed at the University of Chicago campus, a great partner for us in Hong Kong, and will be shown at other venues later this year. The exhibit, which is open to the public, provides an immersive, fun, and interactive experience to which diplomats from across our mission can invite contacts, allowing them to showcase a piece of US history that is, quite frankly, a great story about democracy in action and to ignite conversations about democratic values. And so in the interest of time, let me wrap up there, and we'd be happy to take questions later on.
Thank you, Jacqueline. All three of you hit upon my favorite areas, which working for VOA, I'm intrigued about the media campaign, what messages worked and didn't. And my daughters actually went to the Hong Kong University Law School, so I get the alumni announcements all the time at my house. So we look forward to having a robust discussion about how you guys are operating in a restrictive environment. And we're already getting lots of questions in, so be prepared. I'm now going to turn to someone who is not on the midnight time zone like Sohini and Jacqueline and her team were. It's Allyson Hamilton-McIntire. She is the Assistant Information Officer in Mexico City. And her campaign and her office are a lot closer to home, and many of us probably know a lot about the issues. So Allyson, tell us about what you did and why you won the award and what impact you had for the US government.
Thank you, Joan. And thank you to the Public Diplomacy Association of America and for the award, and congrats to my colleagues, also the recipients. I'm really impressed. I too have questions and look forward to learning more. So the topic that I was received the award for is a topic that we're familiar with, and in Mexico we often have to deal with policies and politics that are normally domestic in the United States, and in this case it's migration. Obviously this is not a domestic issue alone, but it's an issue that with a shared border between Mexico and the United States, it has been an issue that has spanned really many years. And most recently, with the change of presidential administration, we were challenged with the goal of taking a policy that was from the previous administration and really doing quite a change on that to allow migrants to enter the United States. So I'll give a little bit of a baseline description of what that was, and then talk about how we collaborated across Mission Mexico and really across the region to reach our goal. So in the previous administration, there was a program called the Migration Protection Protocols. What this did, it's also known as Remain in Mexico more commonly, and it was an effort to reduce the number of migrants trying to seek entrance into the United States in an irregular manner. What it did is it required that when a migrant was trying to enter the United States and claim asylum, that they were returned to Mexico to wait for their asylum process to continue, so until their court date. This resulted in about between 60 and 70,000 migrants waiting in Mexico over about a year or two period. When the Biden administration took control of the migration policies, they turned this policy around. They stopped receiving migrants under this policy, and they decided that they would start receiving migrants and restarting the process to allow migrants to continue their process for asylum in the United States. And that remained, there were about 26,000 remaining at that time that still were waiting along the US-Mexico border in shelters, in very difficult situations, many of them, waiting for their asylum claims to be processed by US authorities. We were giving about a week notice. Normally with public affairs outreach campaigns, we like to have plenty of time to plan ahead, to talk to, do research, plan for audience analysis. And in this case, we had about a week, a turnaround of once they told us the processing would begin. So our challenge and our goal that we were faced with was to target the 26,000 migrants that were eligible for intake in the United States, while maintaining the policy and top line points that the United States is still not open for irregular migration. And as you can imagine, that was quite the challenge. What we did and what really was important on the front end was communicating with our Government of Mexico colleagues to make sure that they understood the process, to make sure that they were on board with our communications process. We worked hand in hand with international organizations like UNHCR and IOM. They were the on-the-ground implementers of this. They were the hands at the shelters doing the work, and it was important for us to align our visuals, align our top line messages to make sure that we could target the right migrants that were eligible for the situation, but also not play into the hands of the coyotes or the traffickers that often told false narratives to migrants in order to allow them to believe that they could enter the United States easily. So what I did was really a rush process to try to make sure we could connect with as many of our partners as possible. So like I said, that included international organizations. That included a team we put together from the PAOs across our consulates and included our local staff. We have 9 consulates in Mexico, and then plus the embassies. So that's 10 public affairs sections, a portion of them led by American officers and others by our champions, our local staff members. We arranged for about, let's see, 40, between 30 and 40 radio interviews per week for our Department of Homeland Security attaché along the border region. We targeted his message along the border region to talk about when people could access the program. We organized and created a website with our partners with UNHCR that would be simple enough for an audience of migrants that are often illiterate and don't have a lot of experience with technology to be able to sign up to get a time to come to a border shelter in order to be processed, because they had to wait until they had that appointment. And then also shared the message that they weren't, or it wasn't necessary to physically come to the border in order to be processed, but that they needed to wait until they had an appointment. So as you can imagine, there were a lot of challenges in this messaging and making sure that we were able to target it in a way that didn't encourage people that didn't qualify, while encouraging those that do qualify to seek out consultation with the NGOs and the shelters and the good actors that were a part of the process. I will say we also I worked really closely and learned a lot through GPA with targeted Google ads, because we don't do a lot of paid advertising in Mexico. For diplomatic reasons, we have to be very careful and targeted about the way we do our messaging. So targeted Google ads, targeted Facebook ads were really something that we had to utilize. We also used some of the basic traditional messaging, and what that was signage. We actually had physical signage on the border wall. We had flyers and pamphlets that we handed out through our partners with NGOs and the international organizations. And I can't give enough credit to my border colleagues in the consulates who were able to work with their CBP colleagues and really take advantage of those established contacts there to make sure we get the message out. Because what we didn't want is to give the wrong message to those that weren't qualified, but also make sure that those who were qualified under the new change in policy were able to enter the United States. I'll say that at the end of the 26,000, and within about a month and a half, we were able to process about 10,000 of the migrants so far. We've identified that a little more of the remaining applicants are across the region. So it's required working with my colleagues and PAOs in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras to get this message out as well. So that's our challenge. We're still moving forward on that and progressing, and migration is something that will be a challenge for many years to come, but I'll say that it's not something that one person can do or one embassy or agency can solve, and it's been a great pleasure to have this challenge in front of me and part of my portfolio. So thank you again. Look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Allyson. Yeah, that sounds like a messaging challenge of threading the needle of 2 different messages, 2 different audiences in the same place. So yes, we'll definitely revert to you for questions because obviously that issue is still front and center on our TV screens every night. We are now going to go to Eric Barbie. Eric is actually at home tonight. He's in Algiers, and he was concerned. It's a holiday at the embassy in Algiers because of Ramadan. So he was worried about his internet connection. And as a result, he asked if he could submit a 5-minute explanation on video, which he's done nicely. And we're going to see that now. Courtney's going to bring it up on your screen. So hang tight and you'll hear it in a minute.
Good afternoon. I'm Eric Barbie, the Public Affairs Officer in Embassy Algiers, and it's an honor to represent our extraordinary section at this year's PDAA Awards. First, a bit about the context. Algeria is Africa's largest geographic country with the second largest population in NEA, and it's facing many challenges. Mass street protests brought down 20-year leader Abdelaziz Bouteflika in 2019 and ushered in new presidential elections. Today, weekly protests continue to call for systemic change, but it's the economy that concerns Algerians now more than ever. Why? Algeria has been overly dependent on oil for far too long, and its statist economy and bloated public sector certainly don't help. With the double blow of COVID-19 and low oil prices, Algerians are hurting. And this is true for its huge youth population. 70% of Algerians are under 35. And it's this group that really suffers with unemployment figures pushing 35%. Meanwhile, China has stepped in as it has throughout much of Africa. It's provided Algeria with massive infrastructure projects and aid, trying to position itself as the partner of choice. So the problem we faced was, how can the United States help a close counterterrorism partner, inspire youth, and compete with our global rivals for influence and business? Thanks to the vision of the previous PAO, Ruben Haroushian, and his IO, LaShawn Knox-Brown, and with significant financial support from the NEA Bureau, public diplomacy provided one way to tackle the problem. We produced a Shark Tank reality TV show to promote entrepreneurship and show U.S. support for young Algerians, while also advancing American business interests. The 10-episode reality TV show, Andi Hulum, which means I Have a Dream in Arabic, featured 60 young Algerians from all over the country competing in business challenges. U.S. companies provided the setting, sponsorship, and opportunities for these young, talented Algerians. These were businesses like Cisco, Pizza Hut, Pittsburgh Paints, and Eli Lilly. This is American corporate social responsibility at its best. The series aired on Algeria's most watched TV channel during prime time in 2020 and served as a launchpad for an embassy-wide campaign on entrepreneurship. Enough of me talking. Here's the 60-second promo.
عندي حلم أول برنامج شبابي مسابقاتي لريادة الأعمال في الجزائر يجمع 60 شاب والوحيد اللي يتخطى كل هذه الصعوبات ويقدر يقنع لجنة التحكيم هو اللي يفوز بلقب الموسم. التحدي، الخوف، العزيمة. رابح واحد برك هو اللي راح يحقق الحلم ويربح 100 مليون.
Tu as commencé à faire quelque chose et tu sois recalé. C'est pas simple. This is the reason why I'm crying. It's not easy.
So what was the result? With embassy branding, a dynamic American host fluent in Arabic and French, guest appearances from the ambassador and DCM, and even a bit of red, white, and blue throughout, we not only reached millions of viewers, but we showed the United States as a force for good. And that, to be frank, was not an easy task in this fiercely independent Arab Muslim country with a complicated relationship to the West. But more than that, we created new businesses and flipped the usual top-down status model in Algeria by shining a spotlight on the power of the individual. And I'd say that this itself is a uniquely American concept. As mentioned, the show featured prominent US businesses working outside of the oil sector. Based on pre and then post-show surveys, Algerians expressed higher degrees of respect for US businesses and greater brand recognition of American companies. And several of these American companies featured in the show saw their revenues spike after it. I'm not going to pretend that this was an easy project. Government officials are not or should not be TV producers. And I'd say the opposite is probably true. We learned quickly there's more to TV filming and broadcasting than meets the eye, and there were numerous hiccups, delays, and unanticipated challenges. I wouldn't recommend this as a one-size-fits-all project for any embassy. And in case you are wondering about season 2 of Andi Hulum, we quickly decided that we would put the idea out into the world, step back, and if others wanted to run with a second season, that'd be great. But so far, there hasn't been movement forward, especially as COVID-19 has complicated things. Diplomacy is a team sport, and that couldn't be truer of this project. It was a collective effort of our entire section, especially our local Algerian staff, who were the continuity between the previous leadership team of officers who transferred out and our current American team. So I really want to say thank you, PDAA, for organizing these awards, for believing in the power of American public diplomacy, and for giving a boost to our whole section. So on that note, I'll end with a final image of our entire team at the premiere of Andi Hulum, Algeria's first reality TV business and entrepreneurship competition. Thank you so much.
Wow, that was great. It's just too bad Eric is not online with us because I have got a million questions myself, coming from a broadcast background. For instance, who produced the show? But yeah, a Shark Tank idea, and I think he's right. Television and broadcasting is not something that you take on without some real expertise. With that, I've already got a whole bunch of questions in the Q&A box, and a reminder to our guests: please put your questions in Q&A, and we'll wrap them up and go through them. But I've got one from Mike Anderson, who works with us at PDAA and as a great booster of public diplomacy. And he has a question for each of the panelists. And I think it's a great question. If each recipient had the power to improve US public diplomacy management program or resources, what one recommendation would they make to their bosses in the embassy or back in Washington? And I think I'll just start with Allyson and just reverse it. So we'll go Allyson, Jacqueline, and Sohini. Go ahead, Allyson.
Thank you. This is a great question. It's one of those questions where if you could do anything you want, what would you do, right? And I think for me, after I've seen the challenges that we've had here in Mexico with messaging, and there have been some hurdles with technology and things like that when we've tried to reach migrants. I think being able to have the resources that some of our colleagues and other agencies have, to be able to dig a little bit deeper on some of the technology that we could use. For instance, being able to access some of the migrants through WhatsApp, which is a channel that they use constantly. It is something that would be really, really helpful. I know it's been done in other countries, but we've come up across quite a few challenges here in Mexico on that. So I think being able to have the financial resources to, and we joke, we have our DoD colleagues that have quite the budget often, that we could use some of that budget. We could redirect some of that funding in order to focus on some of the public diplomacy and some of the messaging that is needed to make sure that the top lines that are very important and key to our policy are actually reach the target audiences successfully. That's something that we have been challenged with repeatedly on the migration topic. And so that's something I would really appreciate a change in.
Great. And obviously you touch on a topic that everybody in the PD world has long wondered about, which is why DoD gets so much public diplomacy money and they don't do public diplomacy. Anyway, yes, we feel your pain, and maybe you need to become a congressional lobbyist in your next life, Allyson. I'm going to turn it to Jacqueline and her team. Your one recommendation.
Oh, one recommendation. I think it also would revolve around funding, but different aspects of the funding. I mean, one, it would be great if 0.7 funding was 2-year, and that would just give us more flexibility. Also, just quite frankly, if we knew earlier in the year just exactly how much money we would have to spend, because sometimes, you're even halfway through the year and you're not quite sure what your budget is. And so it's hard to sometimes fund, grant proposals and other programming in a timely fashion. Also, I just wish there were a lot more money for exchanges for IVLP. Hopefully in the future we will have Fulbright again. And it would be great if we had more money for Fulbright, because when you can actually send people to the United States, those last 3 feet, it makes all the difference.
Do either of your colleagues have any recommendation that they'd like to put forth for the public audience here?
I'm good.
Okay. I mean, I guess I would just have to say that it's, I think that PD programs like this are great. I think sometimes the PD programs don't get the recognition that they need. And I think that's maybe changing, but that's my personal view. Sohini, you actually ran or helped run a multi-year program. How, number one, what's your recommendation? And then maybe just address that issue of how you were able to sort of morph into a multi-year, multi-pronged project.
My recommendation also goes with that same concept. I realize I'm the only locally employed staff over here. So I would look at it in terms of actually telling, my officers about the importance of long-term strategy, of building on partnerships that already exist. Every time we need not create, new programs and new things, but if we believe on the fertile ground that we've already created and build on it, then we get a lot more results is what my experience has said. And this is exactly, it's just not a multi-year, it's been a 10-year campaign, which has just gone stronger and stronger and has become an incredible brand here in Eastern India that people don't even say US consulates trafficking. They just like Anti-Trafficking-in-Persons Conclave, it's just got a name of its own, a brand on its own. And that is because we created those synergies and relationships and kept building on the successes.
Well, you may be the only locally employed staff in the teams in the group here, but you certainly have a lot of fans. A lot of people are signing in saying, "Great work, Sohini." I'm going to turn to Greta Morris, who was an ambassador, and she's my co-chair of the program committee here. And she actually has a question for you, Sohini, which is, are other states in India following your example? I mean, you're in Kolkata, obviously, but how are other states that have a trafficking problem dealing with it?
So while we have been hosting the conclaves, across our consular region, we invite representatives from all over India. In fact, since the last 2-3 years, it's become quite a pan-India event. And yes, we do share a lot of best practices. We share with them, other states are following. And in fact, this year, had it not been for the COVID, we would have hosted our conclave at New Delhi, to get a lot of government attention out there, but we couldn't do that. But yes, by the end of 10 years, we've actually been able to make this a pan-India effort, and everybody is in it, sharing best practices. There's been numerous examples of interstate collaborations that have come out because of our conclave.
Well, that's great. So I have a question here for Allyson, and it is from Samira Bhattacharya. And she says, "I've been interested in the drug cartels that function in Mexico. How have you been working around the cartels, and what are the greatest challenges in the field relating to the cartel activity?"
Thank you for that question. So That's a very sensitive topic in our bilateral diplomatic relation, because of course, a lot of the drug cartels are driven by the fact that there is demand in the United States, and that's an undebatable fact, unfortunately. As far as our communications and this project for migration, the drug cartels have really gotten involved in trafficking in persons. And so I would really like to talk to Sohini a little bit more maybe on how we could borrow some of her ideas, because it's a big business for them. Migrants are willing to pay upwards of $8,000-$10,000 to make it to the United States. And of course, where there's money to be made, the drug cartels are there. So not just trafficking drugs, but they also know how to traffic people. We do a lot of work with INL. INL has a very, very large team here. INL, USAID, all do a lot of on-the-ground projects and work. A lot of our cultural programs obviously are focused on that target audience also, the youth audience, who are often those that are susceptible to wanting to go to the United States and then obviously fall into the hands of traffickers or opt into it, honestly. So it's something that we have to take careful steps on in the public eye. All of our communication and all of our top line messages are always done in joint discussions with the Mexicans. As you can imagine, when we mention one item, sometimes it affects how our negotiations or bilateral relations work on another topic. So we have to be pretty careful on that. I will say, though, that Washington has taken note, and there's actually a delegation here right now to have conversations about this topic. And we always have that debate internally on whether or not this is something that we want to talk about publicly, or whether or not it's not the time yet to talk about something publicly. So it's a daily battle and conversation. Of course, we always have to face the challenges of the Mexican government and different steps they take, because there have been some pretty high level arrests of drug cartel leaders that have been extradited to the United States. So that always throws a wrench in every public diplomacy plan. But I would say it's difficult, and I can't say that we've solved those challenges by any means, but I will say that it's something that we discuss and are in close connection with our Mexican colleagues on daily.
Great. I'm going to just take the moderator's privilege right here, and I'd like to throw this to Jacqueline and her team, because I know that now all of us in the public diplomacy sphere are consumed with the issue of China. Every study we do is how much money the Chinese are spending on their public diplomacy, how they're beating it at our own game, and I'm really curious. I know Harvey mentioned that really the media, the Beijing media, can't be trusted in Hong Kong. How have we been able to fight back against the sort of the Beijing messages, which are probably patently false? I mean, take the Wuhan virus. I'd love to hear what you guys did on that.
Well, I don't know necessarily about COVID-19, but I think what happens is they tend to sometimes overreach in some of their disinformation. And so and I'm also speaking kind of in Hong Kong and externally, it's very difficult to control any message in the mainland, and I would defer to my colleagues at Embassy Beijing and at the consulates there. But when we can, in real time or quickly, counter an obvious lie from Beijing, that gets a lot of traction here, because the Hong Kongers maintain access to Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp and all of the social media platforms. So even though the playing field is definitely tilted against us, we definitely have an opportunity to kind of get our word out. For example, in March, we had a couple COVID cases within our consulate, and immediately a Beijing-owned and operated news organization was putting out information that the individuals that had COVID were roaming around society, still coming to work, making people sick. And we were really quickly able to, counter it factually with credible other voices. In this case, the Hong Kong government themselves saying, no, actually these guys were, were following the appropriate protocols. And so we were able to reinforce the message that we are good citizens here in Hong Kong, that American consulate individuals are complying strictly with Hong Kong's rules, which are probably tighter than almost anywhere else in the world, and doing it in a way that, not only just got that out, but also what we saw in the reaction to our messaging and in the media was, oh yeah, and it's basically, and look, that was propaganda that Beijing tried and failed. So sometimes they're gonna overreach, and when they overreach, you have to be in a position in real time to counter.
Joan, you are muted.
Sorry, just a real quick question that comes from Greta again for Hong Kong team. Is your Fulbright program operating now? Or is that up and running?
No, unfortunately.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the Fulbright program is still suspended. It was suspended under an executive order last year. In my role, I continue to advocate for bringing it back and trying to send up good arguments about why the Fulbright program is sort of why the CAO class teaches you that Fulbright is the flagship exchange program, even when times get tough. So we do have quite a number of scholars here that are very interested in studying the United States, and also great universities that would love to see American scholars here.
I'll just make a plug for our joint organizations, PDC, PDAA, and USC Annenberg. We have monthly programs and would love to have you guys participate. And we have one in September marking the anniversary of Fulbright. So a lot of people in our organizations have backgrounds in the Fulbright program, and I'm sure that we will be good advocates for you in Hong Kong. Let me just turn real quickly back to Allyson, and I've got a question from Joe Johnson, who's very active in our groups, and he's talking about audience research and how much audience research you were able to do in your week before launching your program, Allyson, and how, just talk a little bit about how you got that data and how you leveraged it.
Okay, sure. So while this program we had about a week to prepare for to do the messaging on, we've been messaging on migration for intensely for about a year or two. And we've been able to use focus groups and surveys, both here in Mexico City that we've done from the embassy, as well as with Global Public Affairs, GPA, been able to do that with us as well. And that's been key. And what's been another challenge to throw in to the mix is not only have we been messaging to Mexicans, so people that are in Mexico and considering trying to migrate to the United States, but also Central Americans that are moving through the country. And those are two very different audiences. And so what we have been able to do with some of our research is to figure out and target not only the source cities and areas for Mexican migration, but also we have a pretty good target on the route that migrants take through Mexico in order to be able to target our radio interviews, because radio we found was one of the more productive ways to get out our message. The cities, even small, tiny community radio stations, although they seem like they might not have that much of an impact, are really been key for us. And a lot of the networks that have are conglomerates of those smaller stations have been helpful to us, as well as figuring out where migrants get their information. Unfortunately, some of the time, and a lot of the time actually, where they get their information is from family members and friends in the United States. So the diaspora community in the United States is very strong. Not only do they give them information, they also finance them often. And so working with our colleagues in DHS, because they do a lot more messaging, obviously, in the United States on that, but working with GPA, DHS, CBP, and then also our own research here to learn where migrants get their information, how and where are they, their age group. Obviously, we found that, excuse me, wives and mothers have a large influence on the decision to migrate. And so that's been another target audience that we have as a secondary target audience. So we've had a chance to do quite a bit of research. We're still trying to dig in a little bit more on the tech side, because while most migrants have a phone, it may or may not be a smartphone, but how do they get their information? And WhatsApp is the nut that we're still trying to crack here in Mexico, as far as how to get to them. But we've done quite a bit of research and continue to do so. We have ongoing, actually, focus groups right now. I will say that COVID has made that a bit difficult because people are not we don't get as much information from virtual focus groups as we do in-person focus groups. But we've still been able to continue that work, and it's been very useful. And also on the ground, information from NGOs. Our great connections with the consulates and NGOs have been really helpful in getting a sense of who these people are, whether they're family units or whether they're individuals, single males, and how we direct and change our messaging for that.
And I think I'm going to hire you, Allyson, to come to VOA and tell our bosses about the role of radio, because we have kind of an uphill battle with VOA. We're constantly trying to say radio is important, but a lot of people think now that, oh, it's all digital. And I think you're reinforcing that it's not always all digital.
Right.
Sohini, there's a couple of questions for you. One is from Vinat Prakash, and I'm going to take a little liberty and broaden this question. He wants to know about COVID-19 and trafficking. I'm going to broaden it and ask you how the situation in India is affecting PD operations.
It's, I mean, of course, now it's affected the situation right now we are in, it's affected PD operations to a great extent, but I will still say that in spite of this recent hike or rise, we are able to work a lot through our partners. So when we are physically even not able to reach, we are able to do that with a lot of those partnerships that we have created. In terms of COVID-19, though it's not a situation, it's really something to be very concerned about. We've heard many of our anti-trafficking partners say that it's pushed us back 20, 30 years, because of the unprecedented, the migrant laborers going out of work, the school system going online, which is, absolutely, obviously not feasible in rural India. So we don't know, we don't get the real numbers, but what partners on ground say is that it's going to be a huge mammoth task, once the lockdown again eases, because most of our states, as you know, have gone into a semi-lockdown right now because of what's happening.
Well, we wish you the best. And I know that's a challenging situation, and we've all been reading about it and monitoring about it and hearing it, and you're actually living it. So we're just really out of time. We try to keep this to 1 hour because we know people are busy. And in the case of the Hong Kong and Calcutta teams, they need to go to bed. So I'm going to now turn it over to Joel Fishman, who's the president of the Public Diplomacy Association of America, and he is going to close the program. And welcome, Joel.
Thank you, Joan. Well, if ever we needed an antidote to the despair over public diplomacy these past few years, these impressive practitioners have provided it. Wow. I add my congratulations to Eric Barbie in Algiers, Sohini Das in Kolkata, the Public Affairs section of US Congen Hong Kong, and Allyson Hamilton-McIntire in Mexico City. You have indeed inspired us this past hour. Your stories are an inspiration. You have our admiration and support as you continue your work and dedication against continuing challenges going forward. Keep up the good work. I wish also to thank Judy Baruti and the PDAA Awards Committee for your dedicated work in managing the awards program. The 4 winners we witnessed today were chosen from a bunch of top-notch nominations. For the members of this committee, it was a labor of love. As we look forward in our programming, our next First Monday, June 7, will feature a speaker familiar to many of us, Kristen Lord, IREX President and CEO. Kristen's presentation is titled Making the Case for U.S. Public Diplomacy, and that's the first Monday in June. And on Friday, June 18 at 12 noon, our speaker will be Amberin Zaman, And forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the name. Ms. Zaman is a Turkish journalist and Middle East correspondent with Al Monitor. Zaman will discuss the important and increasingly challenged role of the media in Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. That's Friday, June 18. We in the Public Diplomacy Association of America, the Public Diplomacy Council, and the USC Annenberg Center on Communication, Leadership, and Policy are delighted to bring you these programs. See you on June 7. Bye for now.
Thank you. And congratulations to a fabulously inspiring group. Bye.